Bienvenue à tous. Welcome to Reporters here on France 24. I'm Mark Owen. In this edition, the opioid painkiller crisis in the USA that's claiming 140 lives every day. Ordinary people hooked on drugs that have been prescribed by a doctor to help them cope with pain. Opioid drugs have become the biggest cause of death of people under 50 in America. Powerful painkillers that leave the patient hooked. Many turn to street drugs like heroin when the legitimate treatment is over. The White House has declared it a public health emergency, but help is not reaching local communities. The headline case is perhaps that of the music star Prince, who died of an overdose in 2016, hooked on the powerful opioid painkiller fentanyl. But there are thousands of ordinary people coping with the same problem, and each day there are deaths. This report by Hayde Fitzpatrick, Valérie Defert, Baptiste Fenwick and Romain Jany.
Officer Yakut has been protecting residents of Everett for more than 20 years.
We'll be on number 98.
She's now seeing a new threat in the city of 100,000 people, drug addiction.
It boomed probably in the last 5 years, 6 years. Because honestly, before that, you rarely came across somebody that was using heroin. And now it's pretty much everybody that we come in contact with.
Everett police have created a special unit to confront the growing epidemic. Officer Yakut patrols with social worker Caitlin Dowd, who helps drug addicts get treatment. Patrick is a heroin user.
But how much would you say are you guys using right now?
A gram a day.
Yeah. Which, on average, how much was that costing a day?
I don't know, 80 bucks.
80 bucks a day.
Yeah.
That are options.
Patrick's descent started with a single prescription of opioid painkillers after an injury.
And why were you prescribed this pill?
I hurt my back in a car wreck.
Opioids are synthetic drugs derived from opium. When prescriptions run out, addicted patients turn to street drugs like heroin.
It's cheaper than pills, yeah, by far.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. When I was using pills, I could spend $200 or $300 a day easy, and heroin's way cheaper. It's like a fraction of the cost.
In Everett and nationwide, heroin use is up 62% in 15 years.
So you can see more orange needle caps. I mean, it's pretty much just a trail. Here's a couple of syringes right here. We leave them here. We don't pick them up. I never thought that, even as a police officer, that I would be doing the job that I'm doing now with all the outreach and everything. I mean, this is such a new thing in law enforcement, but it's a very necessary thing.
Nationwide, the number of deaths caused by opioids has tripled in 10 years. 64,000 fatalities in 2016 alone. This reality is visible at the local morgues. 140 overdose deaths every day, more than from car accidents or firearms.
It's appearing more often in the drugs present that's caused death. Fentanyl, methadone have moved to, over the last 10 years, to become the major percentage, the major proportion or fraction of the overall drug deaths.
The addiction epidemic affects every social group. Take the Warfield family, who live in this prosperous Everett neighborhood.
Hi, baby, how are you? Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Thanks.
Pictures and memories. All that's left to remember Spencer Warfield, a 24-year-old college student.
He was very athletic and a very tall, 6'5" guy. So he's right here, one of the biggest ones on the team.
5 years ago, Spencer died from an overdose, addicted first to painkillers and then heroin.
Got up in the morning and heard the TV on really loud and just, thought he had fallen asleep down there with the TV on. So Didn't go down at first, waited an hour or so and went down to check on him, and he had overdosed. So he was already gone when we found him down there.
Like many others, Spencer's addiction started with a prescription for pain medication after dislocating his shoulder.
Just the normal thing to do when someone gets hurt, you know, give them something for pain. The doctor was actually our neighbor, so we felt, you know, obviously very confident and didn't think anything about it at that time.
Spencer's parents blamed the doctor and the pharmaceutical company that developed OxyContin, an opioid.
You know, they've started a major epidemic, and they're not doing anything, nor is the medical community really doing anything to help people.
Overwhelmed by the number of overdoses, the city of Everett is now distributing special kits to residents so they can safely clean up syringes throughout their community.
This is all of the materials that you would need to safely clean up a needle yourself.
The city is also suing Purdue Pharma, which produces OxyContin. It accuses the pharmaceutical company of deliberately letting the painkiller prosper on the black market.
There's some links here in the. They were aware of a clinic in Los Angeles where homeless individuals would be paid by criminal gangs to go in, get prescriptions for OxyContin, go to a pharmacy that was complicit, fill those prescriptions, take the OxyContin 80 pills, and then give them back to this criminal enterprise that would then traffic them up to the city of Everett and sell them on the streets for a profit.
The city has acquired incriminating evidence, internal emails of Purdue Pharma employees.
I went to the clinic with my rep. It was packed with a line out the door with people who looked like gang members. I feel very certain that this is an organized drug ring. This is clearly diversion. Shouldn't the Drug Enforcement Agency be contacted about this?
The city is suing for millions in compensation to finance rehab treatment for addicted residents. We contacted Purdue Pharma, but the company declined our request for an interview.
Founded by brothers, two physicians who strived to help doctors help patients.
Founded by philanthropist brothers, Purdue Pharma pleaded guilty in 2007 for misleading doctors, patients and regulators about the addictive risks of OxyContin. The company paid a €500 million fine. It was a record-breaking penalty in the US, though a small percentage of the €30 billion profit generated by OxyContin sales. In just 15 years, prescriptions of the narcotic painkiller rose from 300,000 to 14 million, and OxyContin is still being prescribed. Every week, Bobby Catanez meets with her doctor.
How's the pain been?
It's not as good as I would like it.
This former first aid worker became addicted to OxyContin after a horseback riding accident.
When I was taking those opiates, everything goes away. You know, I'm not going to lie. When you first start taking them, it's a really good feeling. It's a euphoric feeling that everything is good no matter what.
You're always kind of frenetic.
Around the year 2000, opioids became the medically recommended pain prescription. But today, methadone, oxycodone and hydrocodone are both curing and killing patients.
More Americans died last year from opiate-related overdose than all the Americans who died in Vietnam. So there has been a major increase, right? And there was especially because of this push in around 2000 about trying to treat pain more aggressively in the United States. And that pain became the fifth vital sign. And the US Congress made 2001 to 2011 the decade against pain, and they were really struggling to try and treat pain better. Doctors used to sort of sometimes say it's gonna hurt, deal with it. And now doctors were encouraged to treat people's pain more aggressively.
To stop the overconsumption of painkillers, the government has created a prescription monitoring system.
There used to be no way for me to tell if my patient was getting a prescription from me and Dr. Jones and Dr. Smith and Dr. Thomas. And now I can look in the PDMP, the prescription drug monitoring database, and I can actually see all the controlled substances that my patient has gotten in the last 6 months. That's incredibly helpful.
Since the database launch, the number of opioid prescriptions has dropped. But without pills, addicted patients turn to the black market and street drugs.
To me, heroin was junkies did that. I was not a junkie. I was a professional, successful business person, mother, PTA president. So for me to turn into an addict, and I tell people today, if somebody like me can turn into a drug addict, it can happen to anybody.
My administration is officially declaring the opioid crisis a national public health emergency under federal law.
The Trump administration has promised funding and staffing to halt the overdose epidemic. But more than 2 months later, funds have still not been allocated. In California, Los Angeles County Sheriff deputies are no longer waiting for announcements before they act.
Right now, what our nation is facing is an opiate epidemic. A lot of people are dying of opiate overdoses.
These first responders see the impact of addiction firsthand. 10,000 Los Angeles deputies are being trained to use Narcan, which reverses in seconds the effects of an overdose.
You hold it like a nasal spray, and when you enter it into the nostril, you just go as far as your fingers touch the nose.
I've gone to calls where the guy still has the needle in his neck, you know, and they overdose within 1 or 2 minutes of me responding there. And it's kind of strange because our department, the sheriffs, are integrating medical into our everyday use now. As before, we would only go through first aid and CPR, compressions, rescue breathing, but now we're actually administering medication. So
the authorities are also alarmed by a surge on the black market of a new synthetic drug called fentanyl. It's more potent and more dangerous than heroin.
If for some reason this stuff actually gets airborne, your partner's going to, start showing signs of an opioid overdose. So that's another reason why we're carrying this, is for our own protection.
Manufactured in China, low-cost fentanyl is bought by drug traffickers on the dark web and then laced with heroin.
Fentanyl is about 50 to 100 times more potent than heroin. So what's happening is your drug user is loading up their syringe with the dose of heroin that they normally would use on a daily basis. However, it's laced with fentanyl, and they're injecting themselves with the lethal amount.
In 2018, all Los Angeles deputies will carry Narcan on patrol. It costs 65 euros per dose, a significant burden on the country's budget. Narcan doesn't reduce narcotic use, but it can prevent overdose deaths, an important step in protecting the more than 2 million Americans currently at risk.
Our correspondent Naibe Reynoso joins us now from Los Angeles. Naibe, why haven't the authorities acted sooner? 140 deaths every day.
Well, this is exactly the question that everyone is asking. It's not just an epidemic. The U.S. is facing a health scandal in which every party bears a responsibility. The government and its agencies who failed in regulating opioid use because they've been influenced by pharmaceutical companies. Pharmaceutical companies for downplaying the dangers of some painkillers, and some unscrupulous doctors looking for profit. What we saw in our report is that most patients trusted their doctors and became addicted without even knowing it and without being aware of the risks. A dramatic situation that has gotten even worse after several political decisions. An investigation conducted by the Washington Post shows that in August of 2016, at the heat of the opioid crisis, the U.S. Congress, pressured by lobbies from the pharmaceutical industry, voted on a series of laws that softened the distribution rules for painkillers.
Naibe, the president of the US, Donald Trump, has he found the funding to begin tackling this serious public health problem?
Well, Donald Trump did promise to stop the overdose epidemic and even formally declared the opioid crisis a public health emergency, which allowed him to use special funds to battle the crisis. But many have criticized the president, saying he acted fast only to satisfy the base of his electorate, because most of the people affected by this opioid crisis are white, middle-class Americans living in rural America. And what really caused a scandal in the United States is when President Trump appointed Tom Marino to be in charge of resolving this crisis. But Tom Marino is the Republican Congress member who lobbied hard to have passed the laws that are now favorable to pharmaceutical companies.
Now, Ibe, what are the solutions being put forward to try to end this crisis?
Well, one of the best solutions would be stricter regulations on the sale and use of opioids, and even prohibiting the sale of certain pills. But that goes against the interests of pharmaceuticals. Now, the administration has taken some actions, such as limiting the quantity of painkillers prescribed after an injury. Now, it's 3 days maximum instead of 5 to avoid any risks of addiction. But until now, the measure that has been the most successful is the prescription monitoring program mentioned by the doctor in our report that allows doctors to know if a patient received painkiller prescriptions from different doctors.
Ibe Reynoso in Los Angeles, thank you very much indeed. And thank you for watching. See this report again via our website, france24.com. This is Reporters on France 24. Stay with us.